Hi, welcome back to the Talent Lab. I'm your host, Brad McMillan, with my co-host, Marina Hart. We're with RPM Research, and welcome back. So before we jump in, I want to take a moment to level set what the Talent Lab really is about. So this show is focused on giving company leaders real, usable insights for targeted hiring in drug development across both the preclinical and clinical spectrums. We also care deeply about the other side of the market, candidate career development, because better hiring only happens when both sides are informed. So you'll hear interviews with industry experts, practical frameworks, and real world examples from teams who've hired well and teams who've learned the hard way. You can find the Talent Lab on Spotify, YouTube, or directly through the podcast tab on our website at rpmresearch.solutions. So, Marina, what are we talking about today?
Well, today's episode is about what happens before the role ever gets posted, and specifically how the hiring managers and HR leaders can run a strong hiring kickoff, whether it's a call or a meeting or something as simple as a checklist that we will provide later on that actually sets the search up for success. So, and just to be clear up front, this episode is not for the candidates necessarily, although I know many of them would want to know what the search looks like from the company perspective. So you may want to keep on listening. But this episode is really for the people on the other side of the hiring table, experienced and new hiring managers, human resources and talent acquisition leaders, founders of VC-backed startups, anyone responsible for hiring or filling the role quickly, efficiently, and in a way that lasts.
Right. So this can be utilized for companies of a variety of stages and levels. So whether you have a team of 5 in a startup or transitioning from a company of 30 people to 100 people, or bringing processes along with you as you transition into a company with 1,000 plus people and are hired for the first time within this new company and looking to make that transition as a hiring manager, this is to provide a framework to level set the process.
That's right. So this is our second episode of the Talent Lab, and we have yet to do the proper introduction, but I wanted to acknowledge where I'm coming from. I have been privileged to have a 360 view on the hiring process. I have been on every side of it, from being the hiring manager who is building her team to the human resources manager for a company. Also worked as an internal and external talent acquisition partner. And of course, I've been a candidate myself. So what I'm seeing consistently is that most hiring challenges really don't come from like companies having bad intentions or lack of effort. It's really about something. It's about having some avoidable pitfalls early on. So the goal of this episode is really not to seek perfection or provide or convince you to set up some kind of rigid process. It's really about
Right.
helping you to reframe your thinking and provide a checklist that helps you cross all the T's, dot all your I's, a few very intentional steps that can save time, reduce frustration, and lead to better long-term hires. So, especially in biotech, where the cost of a miss is high, and the teams are already stretched pretty thin.
I know it is the bane of your existence that we
Yeah.
haven't done the intro episode, but we also work with a lot of candidates who are hiring managers and showcase the types of candidates that we work with. So we will get to a proper introduction in the future. We're just very excited about this content right now.
Yeah. So one of the biggest complaints we hear from really all sides concerned, the candidates, the HR, the hiring manager, is how long it takes to find the right person. So how long the process is. Brett, in your experience, you've spent a lot of time working with companies from very early stages before the searches even begin. So what do you think about it? Like, why do you think the roles struggle, or why does the search drag on? What do you see going wrong before the candidate even enters the process?
Yeah, so most searches that struggle don't fail because of the candidates.
Mm.
They fail because the role itself wasn't clearly defined at the start. It usually begins with identifying why the position exists. So, is this a growth role? Is this a brand new function or replacement for someone who is leaving or already gone? And then we see teams skip the harder questions. So how is this role meant to save time, generate revenue, or sustain a critical process? And how have those goals been translated into measurable outcomes, historically or forward facing? And if those answers aren't clear, everything downstream becomes harder, especially for HR, TA, or external partners who are expected to run an efficient search across a very broad spectrum. And we'll dive deeper into this in a future episode.
Yeah, exactly right. And so in our last episode, we spent a lot of time talking about preparation, right? Especially the idea that prep work isn't extra work, it's less work in the future. And the same thing shows up clearly in hiring. When teams slow down up front just enough to align before the job description even enters the picture or gets posted on the internet, everything downstream moves faster and more smoothly. So it's kind of like preventative of future pitfalls.
Yeah, an ounce of preparation is better than a pound of cure. And as we know, proper preparation prevents poor performance. So, what we're really talking about here is having a simple outline or guide for the things that need to be discussed before you open a role, why the role exists, what success actually looks like, how those decisions are going to be made, and what matters most versus what is flexible. When that clarity is missing, the search tends to feel chaotic. You get rewrites of the job description mid process, inconsistent interviews, mixed signals to candidates, and a lot of backtracking. And that doesn't just slow hiring, it shows up in the candidate experience. And whether teams realize it or not, in the company's employer brand, not to mention the cost in time, missed opportunity for process improvement, and revenue lost in a search that drags on, as well as lost candidates to a lengthy process.
Yeah, agreed completely. Candidates can really feel when the team is not aligned. I think we don't pay enough attention to that aspect of it. They notice when expectations change mid process or when interviews feel unstructured. A poor hiring process directly affects the company brand and the way that candidates look at it. Even strong candidates walk away thinking, this doesn't feel buttoned up. And guess what? This is going to have an effect in the end. It will have an effect on how they think about an offer should one come their way and how likely they are to take it. So on the flip side, when you take the time to align up front, the role is clear, the interviews are more focused, candidates know exactly what they're walking into, and the company comes across as intentional, as thoughtful, regardless whether an offer is made.
Yeah, and candidate experience matters. And we are in a small, focused, niche industry. And when you have leaders that have gone through a poor interview process, they go on to other companies and have the possibility of making decisions to work with your organization in some sort of capacity. That could be client, that could be collaborator. So think of your process as future marketing to potential customers and collaborators.
Exactly. So in this episode, again, we're really not talking about approvals or budgeting or internal green lighting. We're assuming the role is approved, the budget is there, and now it's time to actually hire. So how should you think about the next steps?
Well, there are nuances depending on whether this is a brand new role or a replacement, but the core outline stays the same, and this checklist will help you stay focused.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into it. You're the hiring manager, someone has left, or the new need has been identified. HR is involved if you have it, or maybe you're handling it yourself. You're approved to hire, you're ready to start. Step one is almost always the job description.
Right. And is the job description you have current and aligned with the goals of this role of saving time, saving money, or improving or sustaining process? And
Mhm.
this is the onus of the hiring manager to do a little bit of soul searching to see if this is aligned. And we're going to revisit this at a later episode in more detail.
Yeah. So the first question you can ask about the job description is this updated, right? And if the answer is yes, the follow up question to that would be, is it still relevant? This is the moment you can step back and really reevaluate what you have to make sure that this is the job description of the role you need today, not something that was written for the role 2 or 3 years ago. hiring managers really need to ask themselves a few different questions. Have the responsibilities shifted? Is this role solving the same problem as before? Does this require a more experienced, like a plug and play candidate? Or do
Hmm.
you have the time, the effort to mentor somebody who can come in and grow into that role? What are some of the pain points this role addresses, right? These are not HR questions. They're hiring manager questions. And whether or not they're answered clearly is going to affect how everything goes down the stream. So do take the time. Which actually kind of brings me to a question. Brett, you've worked with plenty of companies in the past, and I'm sure you have seen some of the mistakes or common mistakes that companies make in the job descriptions. Give us a few examples of what you've seen, time and time again that could be easily solved.
Yeah. So most job descriptions miss the mark because they don't line up with the goals of the role.
Mm.
So often responsibility for the job description gets passed back and forth. And what you end up is with what Marina calls a carcass, something reused, patched, and vague.
Yeah, it's something hardly resembling an animal it used to be. Yeah.
And for a new role, you need to build from the ground up. For a replacement role, you need to strip it down and ask, are these responsibilities still relevant? And this matters even more when someone has grown within the company for a few years through promotions and accumulated institutional knowledge. You have to decide whether you're trying to replace that exact path or
Mhm.
redesign the role for where the business is going next.
That's right. So we do see a lot of job descriptions that kind of miss exactly that mark and don't actually describe the job. So a proper job description will have the following four elements: description of responsibilities, as we just mentioned, required skills, what is considered relevant experience, and education if it's truly necessary. One other element that I'd like to see in more job descriptions is, why is the role open? Is it a brand new position? Is the team growing? Is it a replacement? Candidates want to know why the position exists, and unless it's a confidential replacement, that information should not be treated like a state secret. The level of transparency is something that only benefits companies. It creates an honest conversation from the very start. Think of it kind of like much like dating. This job description is your first impression as a company to the candidate, and you can only make the first impression once. So make it the best possible, not like a fairy tale, but a truthful, thoughtful reflection of what it's actually like to work for your company.
Hmm. Hmm. And, another important aspect is to make sure that whoever is involved in the hiring process is also involved in the job description review before it goes out. We often see that the job description of or the interview questions get changed throughout the process by other stakeholders weighing in. And this is where the time suck happens, not to mention lacking clarity on how to evaluate candidates. Make sure that whoever is involved has a voice and has a voice early in the process.
Yeah, and I know that what we're talking about may feel a little overwhelming, especially early on, and it's often where we see our clients bring in an outside search partner. We're commonly involved at the job description stage, helping pressure test it against the market, align it with the role, with the team, and the company itself.
And, one last thing, the scope of the position.
Mhm.
So, HR, talent acquisition, whoever's doing the outbound is asked to search across a huge spectrum because the role wasn't narrowed enough.
Yeah,
And that's not a people problem, that's a definition problem.
yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I'm going to take a breath here and step onto my soapbox for a moment because this is something I care a lot about. Just because the job description is done, the hiring manager cannot just hand it off and hand off the search to their HR or talent acquisition partner, whether they're internal or external, without fully understanding how hiring actually works inside your organization. So before the candidates even enter the picture, the hiring manager must know who posts the role. Where is it promoted? Is it on LinkedIn or other job sites? What systems are you using for tracking candidates? What are the steps in that process? Is posting alone enough, or do we have the policy or the budget to bring outside help if needed? Are referrals encouraged? Are internal candidates considered? What is that process? How are they evaluated? We're not saying that the hiring manager needs to become a human resources or talent acquisition expert. Well, I mean, some are reluctantly, but every hiring manager must be aware of every hiring step. So, Brett, like from your experience, where do you most often see the breakdown in the hiring process?
So I would say ownership is the biggest issue.
Okay.
So when there are multiple stakeholders in the process, what is their role and really their perspective in the process as it relates to the role? So, this role is likely reporting to the hiring manager responsible for the role, not to the supporting team who's interviewing. So, what does the hiring manager want them to look at, to validate, and to view from their perspective? And has that been outlined and communicated? And unfortunately, what we often see is when the hiring manager creates the job description for the role, that they will have input from multiple stakeholders and they make the mistake of not running it by those stakeholders before they post and interview the candidate. And it's to the detriment of the search and the interview process and can take us back to that vibe recruiting. So, if you do have other people whose input on candidates is vital to the hiring process, it's only logical that they should have a say of what is and isn't in the job description if this is a team collaborative environment. So they may see an aspect of the role that you haven't thought of. And I know some of this sounds like common sense, but it really is about going through every step of the process, checking and making sure that something isn't lost, especially if you're in a hurry. And so sometimes you do need to slow down to speed up.
That's right. And again, I think both Brett and I will always say communicate more, not less. So let's see. We have the proper job description, right? We know who is going to be involved in the search or in the decision making and in what capacity, right? The next step is to design or agree on the interview process and define what success actually looks like. I will let
Right.
Brett talk about what success looks like because that is his area that he's very passionate about, but very quickly on designing the actual interview process. So I'm going to rant for just a minute. Interviews are awkward. They're intimidating. They're stressful from the candidate's perspective, right? And at the same time, they're time consuming, cumbersome for the hiring managers. We all know this. So take the time to think through the relevant interview process that fits the role you're hiring for. Is this something the hiring manager can decide on their own? Does anyone else or multiple people need to be involved? Do they actually have to be involved? One of my old mentors used to say, getting busy people together is like herding cats. And that is obviously true, right? So this is something that I always keep in mind when advising clients on what a successful and efficient interview process should look like. If the candidate needs to talk to multiple stakeholders, consider their time, the hiring manager's availability, or actually lack thereof, most of the cases. Maybe a panel interview is a way to go to cut down on the weeks of chasing every single person who needs to be involved for their availability. My point is, there is no cookie cutter recipe for the proper interview process. Every company is going to be different. Every role will have a slightly different flow, but I urge you to take this time before you start the search to figure it out. And if you define it well and have everybody sign off on it, it will avoid last minute changes. It will avoid drawing out the process and do that for not, if not for candidates' sake, then for your own sanity. Okay, rant over. We can move on and talk about the success and what it looks like.
Well, and have you ever found yourself on a search where you're in late stage, everybody is, feels aligned on a candidate, and then somebody else gets involved, and I'm just not feeling it. I just don't know. Something irked me. Once
Right.
again, that's vibe recruiting that we advise against, and this could have been considered early in the process what everybody's looking for and from what perspective are you providing input. And so this is where many of the searches quietly go off the rails. So
Yeah.
the key question is, what does success look like from a deliverables perspective?
Mhm.
And what evidence do you need to see in the early and midterm stages of this candidate's employment, and who defines that? And is that the hiring manager or is that the collective interview team? And when we get into the multiple interviews, who asks which questions from what perspectives, and has everybody's input been shared with the next person down the line? So we're avoiding duplicity.
That's right. And this is very important. We talked about it in the interview prep episode, that some questions should be done during the initial HR or talent acquisition screening, right? Those are the questions that the hiring manager will get the answers for when they see the resume of the candidate, so they don't have to ask them twice. And I think this is how you streamline the process, by really thinking it through.
Right. And the hiring managers need to ask themselves this very important question: how will I know that I am 80% confident after the first conversation I have with a candidate? And what questions I need to ask, what answers I need to hear to gain that confidence. And that confidence needs to come from predefined outcomes, not gut feel or groupthink. So the key stakeholders are also not mind readers. So go back and make sure they understand the job description, the goals of the role, the measurable evaluation criteria, and from what perspective you want from them, or else it's 4 to 5 hiring managers hiring for 4 to 5 different jobs.
That's right. And often we do see that as just something that really bogs down the process. So let's see, you've defined the pain points, defined what the answers should be or what answers matter, made sure that they're gathered consistently, shared. Now let's talk a little bit about soft skills. They're often treated as intangible, but they're actually not. What are your thoughts?
Right. So, I mean, how are you managing them objectively?
Mhm.
So, are you using behavioral interview questions? If you're looking for a certain trait, asking, finding out what you're listening for, and then how are you measuring that? So, you should ask, you shouldn't be asking how likable a candidate was. You should be asking for behavioral questions that showed evidence and thought patterns that align with the soft skills you're looking for, and really digging in to see that evidence. And regarding leadership, it's not about their successes, but how have they managed unsuccessful situations and worked with their team to reach success in the future? And did they or didn't they take ownership?
Yeah.
So ask what outcomes those traits drive and decide upfront what you need most versus what you're willing to be flexible.
Yeah. That's right. And really, so now by this point, you have done all the hard work, right? You've written a job description, you understood the hiring process, you designed the interview flow and the evaluation criteria. There's one more important piece: expectations. This is a good moment to decide whether you're working with your HR or external talent acquisition. What does progress in this search look like in the first week? Are you expecting 50 resumes, 100, 500? What if you're not seeing strong candidates in 7 days? What if it's been 30 days? And at what point do you reassess the role, the market, the strategy that you're going for? Do you need a market assessment? Do you need to understand talent availability? Do you need somebody to come in and increase reach? Do you need somebody to come in and be an internal consultant to relieve the workload? Or is this something that you're redistributing to your team? None of this needs to be over engineered. We're not suggesting that you write like a memoir for every role, but that would take a while. But you definitely need, as a hiring manager, to have clarity on those questions as part of your hiring kickoff strategy, not in the middle of the search. At least in your own mind, you need to have those answers because clarity up front will save you time in the future. It will prevent frustrations later. It will keep the search moving. And again, if you're not sure how to have those conversations, feel free to reach out. We'll walk you through them.
Right. And one of the big things that we need to consider is how much of a unicorn
Purple
or
squirrel.
are we looking for? So, what is your evidence that your criteria is feasible in the market today? So, do all the required traits exist in a strong enough cross section of the market or industry to give you a small group of candidates to compare against?
Yeah. And I know that, we've talked a lot about some of the steps, right? And you may ask, like, why does it matter? Like, what is the point of going through this hiring kickoff checklist or exercise? This isn't about bureaucracy or giving you more paperwork to do. It's about intention. Most hiring problems, in our experience, can be traced back to what was and actually what was not decided early enough.
And we want people to be creative, but
Mhm.
clarity does not limit people, it supports them.
That's right.
And what we've seen is teams that invest in defining expectations see less turnover. And there's a quote I like: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Sure.
And no hiring manager wants to leave that up to any candidate.
That's right. Well, I know it was a lot, but I think this does it for us for today. If you feel this episode was useful, helpful, informative, we've covered related topics and other episodes of the podcast, including interview prep for the hiring managers. We will link the hiring kickoff checklist and related episodes in the show notes. And we also would love to hear from you. Send us your thoughts or ideas on what other topics you want us to cover, or if you feel a little stuck searching for talent, reach out to us for a chat. But as always, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on the Talent Lab.